Deputy Stanley, 30 seconds.
Thanks, Councillor Corla. The question I have here is regarding the rollout of the charging points for EV vehicles in terms of the need to expand that network to deal with range anxiety, but also the ownership of that. The regulator's decision in 2017 has left the ownership of the charging infrastructure up in the air, and I would just ask the Minister to address that. What policy initiatives are being developed by his department to deal with those matters?
Minister.
Thanks indeed for that question. I think it's very relevant. Providing adequate charging infrastructure is critical to ensure the continued growth in the uptake of electrical vehicles. There are currently 668 standard public charging points as part of the ESB's e-car network, and a limited number provided by local authorities and retail outlets. There are also 77 fast chargers, mainly on national routes. Most of the standard public chargers can provide approximately 100 kilometres of range in about 1 hour, whereas fast chargers will typically provide that in 20 minutes. Since the start of last year, €600 grant has been in place for home chargers, and over 1,000 grants have been paid out to date. Under the first call for applications under the Climate Action Fund, I approved funding for up to €10 million to support ESB e-cars to develop a nationwide state-of-the-art electric vehicle fast charging network. And the key elements of that are 6 high-speed charging hubs on motorways capable of charging 8 vehicles simultaneously, 16 high-speed charging hubs delivering for 4 vehicles, additional high-power chargers at 34 current 50 kilowatt locations, upgrading over 50 of the 22 kilowatt to the 50 kilowatt, and replacing 264, which is 528 charge points to pre-existing pilot grade 22 kilowatt chargers to the next generation of high reliability. So there's an ambitious programme. New EU regulations will require employers with over 20 parking spaces to provide charging points by 2020, and that's in addition to requirements in respect of new developments for both commercial and multiple vehicle points. So I do intend to, as part of the climate action plan that I'm developing, to look at the adequacy of the infrastructure and its path of growth to ensure that we can meet the ambitious targets we have for electric vehicles in the network.
Deputy Stanley.
Thanks for the reply, Minister. The question is, and you've outlined some progress on it, and from what you said, there are 678 ESB charging points. And that your department has given a €10 million grant to the ESB. The question here is that, while there will be private charging points, such as the employers by 2020 being compelled to provide charging points where they have more than 20 employees. I think that was the answer you gave to that, and that will certainly cater for a lot of it. But in terms of the 20 parking spaces that they will have to do it. But I think across the state, there's a need for the network to be more substantial, for it to be more strategically located. If people are travelling, from the west of Ireland, travelling from up south, or even from the Midlands, the question of range is always something that's there in terms of what it can do, particularly if you have the lights on in your car and the wipers going and everything else at the same time. So just in relation to the policy direction, in terms of the ownership of it, is the policy direction regarding that the ESB has to divest themselves of it? Where is that coming from? Is it coming from your department? Charging isn't like, refuelling a petrol or diesel car. It's a major investment, and there's an issue as well in relation to the upgrade of the grid, because people will have people will have EVs, Minister, and that is going to put a strain on the grid.
Minister.
Yeah. Is that heretofore charging points have been free and unlimited, and the ESB has signalled that that is not going to continue indefinitely, and it is entering into consultations with stakeholders to introduce fees for fast chargers later in the year and for standard chargers in 2020. And I think the expectation is that you will see a lot more entrants coming in when it's no longer, if you like, a free service. The other network is obviously the local authorities, and local authorities have been very conscious of trying to develop a network that deals with range anxiety, and that is an area that we're also looking at, whether their role can be enhanced and whether they can be supported in this context. So there will be a mixture of public and private, but I suppose the key will be, I suppose, when it's no longer entirely free, there is some, there is a recompense obviously to people who now have obligations, that they get some recompense as well as meeting the obligations, and I think that will promote greater density of the network. But I will be assessing this carefully in the context of the plan to make sure that we have it right.
Just in relation to DSB, the ones that DSB have within their network at the moment, what I'm asking here is that, what's going to happen with them, because there was a big push from the regulator to divest themselves of, for DSB to divest itself of those. Is that continuing, and is that policy direction coming from your department? I'm asking you a very clear question on that. I welcome the fact that local authorities become involved, because I think that the role of local authorities with climate change and climate action, you've heard me say this before in the House, I think that have a huge role to play as the section of government that is closest to the people, and to make that happen at local level, because if it doesn't happen at local level, it doesn't happen at national level. Just in terms of the charging, there will be charging at home, there will be charging in workplaces, but just in terms of grid loading, there is going to be substantial loading on the grid. And if you take in Norway at the moment, there are situations where there are lights flickering sometimes, reported to be flickering in some parts of Norway, where there is a substantial number of EVs. And just in this country, the ESB, and I'll close on this one, the ESB said in their low carbon future document, they said that 275,000 EVs heat pumps connected, that the grid would need 300 million of an upgrade.
Minister to respond.
That's what they said, 200 million.
Yeah, well, first of all, on the question in relation to the ownership, I think the Deputy is right that the regulator did suspend for a while the ESB expansion of the network. However, that has been lifted, and the ESB is now undertaking new expansion under a new dispensation from the CRU. So this is coming from an independent regulator, and there is no requirement to divest that I know of. The loading of the grid, undoubtedly, the Deputy is right. As we enhance the uptake of electric vehicles, we will have to fortify our grid. And I think that's one of the things that EirGrid generally has to look at our capacity, not only for taking on electric vehicles, but taking on renewables. And that's something that is important. Equally important, I think, is moving to have smart metering and dynamic pricing opportunities, so that consumers can meet the pressures on the grid, and there can be a dynamic demand, so that we can manage those sort of pressures better through
Thank you, Minister.
smart meters.
To move on.